Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Friday, Yom Shishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? Yehuda in South Carolina, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Shandor in the Bronx, Melissa in Great Neck, Gordo in Scotland, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bell in Texas, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Chaim in Florida, Ella in Southern California, DPR NYC in New York City. There's the name. Moshe in Brooklyn. Welcome, Moshe in Brooklyn. Debbie in New Jersey, Lanit in Silver Spring. And who's that? Penelope. No. From Penina in Anaheim. Welcome, Penina. And Elise in Virginia. Welcome, everybody. Let's get busy. This is a busy daf today. Okay, our daf is page 10. We're picking up at the bottom of page 9b. Continue our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1. And we're talking about offerings and errors that can be made with respect to intent during slaughter or sprinkling or conveyance or position or designation or consumption. Errors that are made with respect to intent during some part of the offering process, and how does that affect the offering? Does it render disqualified so that it does not fulfill the obligation if a person is obligated to bring the offering, but fit to continue its journey? Elon, could you give me a glass of water, please? Or render it unfit so that we have to stop the offering dead right there. Now, especially today, as we go through this material, the real question that is being asked, because they're definitely going to get in the weeds and sort of raise issues with respect to intent that definitely don't seem like issues that would really come up in the real world. Once you're bringing an offering, why would you change your intent with respect to some future element of the ritual while you're doing an earlier element of the ritual correctly? More important is what is the derivation of each of these principles in the law of the offerings. And if you look at it that way, I think you get a real insight into what the sages were doing for the really centuries that they were working out exactly what does the law hold and how do we know it. Thank you so much. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nifdara. It's like I bit my tongue a few days ago. It's still, your mouth heals slowly. So it's like I have just a sore spot on my tongue. Talking for an hour is probably not the best thing. But we will muscle through. Okay, so the point is, how do they know what they know, right? And they're actually going to push into areas that probably questions wouldn't come up, practical questions wouldn't come up, and yet they need to solve, what the answer would be if such a situation ever did come up. Why? Why is that so important? So that we can trace the derivation process, right? The Torah speaks about the different kinds of offerings and mentions a few of the elements of the offerings, but not all the elements of every offering. And so we have to know, well, with regard to the position in the courtyard, it's mentioned for one kind of offering, it's not mentioned for another kind of offering. Are we going to compare it to the kind of offering where it's not mentioned and doesn't need to be specified? It could be slaughtered anywhere in the courtyard. Or are we going to compare this offering to the kind of offering where the position of slaughter is important, and therefore if it was not slaughtered in the right place, it would be disqualified or possibly even rendered unfit? And how do we know that, right? So it's all about keeping straight what is going on here, what are the elements that are mentioned in the Torah, which can be extended to another law, which cannot, and how do we get there? All right, let's keep that in mind. It was stated, if one slaughtered a sin offering for its sake, right? So he's bringing a sin offering, either because he violated a prohibition unwittingly and became obligated to bring a sin offering, or because he was bringing a sin offering as one of a group of offerings because he completed his term of Naziris, or he was being purified at the end of his being a Mitzorah, or it was a gift offering that includes a sin offering, or as a woman after childbirth, different situations where a sin offering is brought. Okay. So the person is bringing a sin offering, and at the time that the animal is slaughtered, the person doing the slaughter had the correct intention in mind, that it was for a sin offering, if it's to atone for a sin, it's atoning for the correct sin, and of the correct owner, right? So far the sin offering remains in line, fit and qualified. Okay, if one slaughtered a sin offering for its sake, but he had intent at the time of the correct slaughter, he had intent for the correct kind of slaughter, but he was also thinking ahead, and he had intent to sprinkle its blood not for its sake, but for the sake of another type of offering. Rabbi Yochanan says that the offering is unfit, and Reish Lakish says it is fit. So this is why I say this doesn't seem very real world at all. Why would you do that? You're the person slaughtering. Either you're the owner or you're doing it for the owner, but you know who the owner is. You know that it's a sin offering. You know why it's being brought. You have the correct intent for all those things at the time of slaughter, but for some reason, you're also thinking ahead and thinking that, because at the time of slaughter, right, it's an incision across the neck, blood pours out, it's collected in a temple vessel, a special vessel used for that. It's conveyed, right, that blood is carried in the temple vessel to the altar, and then it's going to be sprinkled on the altar. And there's a particular process, as we'll learn today, for sprinkling the blood for sin offerings, burnt offerings, peace offerings. They all have a particular procedure for the sprinkling. And the person at the time that he's slaughtering with correct intent, for some reason, has incorrect intent of what he's going to do with the sprinkling later. So are we going to render this offering unfit or disqualified because even though he had correct intent about what he was doing, slaughter, he had incorrect intent of what he was going to do later? right? It's almost like his to-do list of how he was going to finish bringing this offering had an error in a lower down item, when he gets to the sprinkling. So we have a machloket. Rabbi Yochanan says it would be rendered unfit. Reish Lakish says fit. Rabbi Yochanan says unfit. As in his opinion, one can have intention from one rite to affect another rite, R-I-T-E. i.e., one can disqualify an offering by performing one rite with improper intent about a subsequent rite that he has not yet performed. Right? So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's possible that even though you're doing the slaughter correctly, you could have in mind to do the sprinkling incorrectly, and that would render the whole thing unfit. And where does he get this idea? We derive this law from the intent of pigul. What is pigul? This is intent while performing one of the main rites to consume the offering after the appointed time, which would disqualify the offering. That's something the Torah says. If at the time that you're slaughtering the offering, you're thinking, right, that, and I'm going to eat this, let's say it's a peace offering where the owners can eat it, or a sin offering where the priest can eat it, and at the time of the slaughter, the person is thinking that the consumption, the eating of it, is going to happen, we're going to save it for breakfast on Wednesday. And this is happening on Sunday. So for sure, that's beyond the allotted time. So even though, we didn't wait until the time had elapsed, there's a time within which you have to eat an offering if there's an edible part. And depending on the type of offering, it might be until the next morning or the next night. Whatever it is, if at the time of slaughtering it, you're already intending to eat it beyond its allotted time, it's already disqualified. That's explicitly mentioned in the Torah. So since you can have an incorrect intent about a future action, which would disqualify it now, Rabbi Yochanan is going to extend that idea to other kinds of incorrect intent about future elements of the ritual. And Reish Lakish says that it is fit. Having incorrect intention about the sprinkling at the time of the slaughter is not going to render it unfit immediately. As in his opinion, one cannot have intention from one rite to affect another rite, and we do not derive laws with regard to deviation from the type of offering from the intent of pigul, because Reish Lakish says pigul is specific. It just says, the Torah says, if you're intending to eat it beyond its allotted time, that will disqualify it. But according to Reish Lakish, you don't extend that idea to other kinds of deviation from the procedure. And Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish each follow their general line of reasoning in this matter. As it was stated, now we're on page 10a, with regard to one who slaughters an animal in order to sprinkle its blood for idolatry. Okay, so he's slaughtering, let's say correctly, a sin offering, but for some reason he has in mind that when he reaches the sprinkling portion of the procedure, right, and sprinkling is the most important part. That's if an offering is there to achieve atonement, the atonement is achieved when its blood is sprinkled on the altar. But this person, for some reason, is thinking that, when I sprinkle it on the altar, even though I'm standing in the holy temple that God commanded the Jews to build, so offerings could be brought to God for the Jewish people, this person is thinking that when he gets to the sprinkling phase of the offering, he's going to do that for some fake deity, represented by, a statue or whatever, idolatry. So that would seem, right, to definitely invalidate the whole thing. If you're going to bring an offering for idolatry, in fact, it's a sin punishable by death if it was witness proved, etc. Idolatry is one of the worst sins there is. Okay, so with regard to one who slaughters an animal, in order to sprinkle its blood for idol worship, or in order to burn its forbidden fat for idol worship, you know what? We don't even have to be in the temple here. This could just be somebody who wants to commit idolatry. He takes an animal, he's going to slaughter it, and his goal is to sprinkle the blood, let's say, on his idol that he worships. So he's taking a positive action for the purpose of committing idolatry. This is definitely a death penalty offense. or to burn its forbidden fat for idolatry. So Rabbi Yochanan says, deriving benefit from the animal is prohibited. He didn't commit the idolatry yet, right? The sprinkling or the burning of the fat, that will be the actual act of idolatry. But he is slaughtering the animal so that he will have blood to sprinkle or he will have fat to burn for idolatry. So Rabbi Yochanan says deriving benefit from this animal is prohibited, as it is considered already an offering to idol worship, even if ultimately its blood was not sprinkled or its fat was not burned for that effect. And this is because one can have intention from one rite to affect another rite. Idolatrous intent while slaughtering the animal renders it forbidden, even if the intention pertains not to the slaughter itself, but to the sprinkling of the blood or the burning of the forbidden fat, right? Why is he slaughtering the animal? So he'll have blood to sprinkle for idolatry. He wasn't thinking idolatry at the moment of killing it. Maybe he's thinking, I'll collect some blood, the rest I'm going to, serve at the barbecue. But he was collecting the blood for that reason. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it was slaughtered with idolatry in mind. Therefore, this was an animal used for idolatry, and it's entirely prohibited to benefit from that animal for a Jew. Or for anyone, actually, because idolatry is prohibited for all people. And this law is derived from the laws of Pigul, as we derive the laws of idolatry, which are applicable even outside the temple, from laws concerning intent that apply inside the temple. That's Rabbi Yochanan's reasoning. Reish Lakish says, deriving benefit from the animal that was slaughtered in order to later its blood would be sprinkled for idolatry. Reish Lakish says, deriving benefit from the animal is permitted because it was not used for idolatry yet. One cannot have intention from one rite to affect another rite. And we do not derive laws applicable outside the temple from laws that apply only inside the temple. Although both disputes are essentially the same, each is necessary. And if the sages had taught us the dispute only with regard to that issue, namely an animal slaughtered with idolatrous intent, one would have reasoned that Reish Lakish says, maybe if I talk a little more quietly, it'll be easier on me. So although both disputes are essentially the same, each is necessary. And if the sages had taught us the dispute only with regard to that issue, namely an animal slaughtered with idolatrous intent, one would have reasoned that Reish Lakish says his opinion only with regard to that issue, as he maintains that laws applicable outside the temple are not derived from laws applicable only inside the temple. But with regard to an offering that was slaughtered with the intention of sprinkling its blood, not for its sake, one might say that he concedes to Rabbi Yochanan that it is disqualified, as laws applicable inside the temple can be derived from other laws that are applicable inside the temple. And if the sages had taught us the dispute only with regard to this issue, namely an offering that was slaughtered with the intention of sprinkling its blood, not for its sake, one might claim that Rabbi Yochanan says his opinion only with regard to this issue, which concerns laws applicable inside the temple. But with regard to that issue, an animal that was slaughtered with idolatrous intent outside the temple, one would say that he concedes to the opinion of Reish Lakish that laws applicable outside the temple are not derived from laws applicable only inside the temple. Therefore, both statements are necessary there, right? They each had to make rulings in both these cases, an offering in the temple that was slaughtered with correct intent, but with incorrect intent for the sprinkling of the blood on the altar later, and the ruling with respect to an animal slaughtered outside the temple for the purpose of later sprinkling blood for idolatry, and you needed both rulings. You can't derive one from the other for the reasons mentioned. When Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, he said Rav Yirmiyah responds to this dispute by eliciting evidence to support the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Illa elicits evidence to support the opinion of Reish Lakish. Rav Dimi elaborated. Rav Yirmiyah elicits evidence to support the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. by a kal v'chomer inference, just as in the case of improper intent with regard to the offering's time. That's pigul, right? That you have to eat it by a certain time. Where if the one slaughtering the offering said, I am hereby slaughtering it beyond its designated time, it is fit, and nevertheless. So interesting. What does that mean? Not pigul. He's not talking about at the time of slaughter that later he's going to eat it beyond its allotted time. He's talking perhaps of a Pesach, right, which has to be slaughtered on a certain date, the afternoon before Passover begins. And at the time that he's slaughtering it, it's the right time. But he says, I'm slaughtering it at the wrong time. So do his words matter? I mean, like, he's actually slaughtering it at the right time. Doesn't his action prove what he really intended to do? Or do we say, since his words are that he's slaughtering it at the wrong time, that should render it unfit? Just as in the case of improper intent with regard to the offering's time, where if the one slaughtering the offering said, I'm hereby slaughtering it beyond its designated time, it is fit, and nevertheless, if he slaughtered it in order to sprinkle its blood beyond its designated time, it is unfit. So too in the case of deviation from the type of offering, where even if he said, I'm hereby slaughtering it not for its sake, it is unfit. Isn't it logical that if he slaughtered it in order to sprinkle its blood not for its sake, it should be unfit? That's how he's deriving that having this incorrect intent about the later stage in the process will render it unfit. And Rab Bar Achilai objects to this inference. One cannot claim that deviation from the type of offering is, right, that you had in mind a burnt offering when you're doing a sin offering. One cannot claim that deviation from the type of offering is a more severe transgression than intent to consume it or sprinkle its blood beyond its designated time, since the latter has its own element of stringency. What is notable about intent beyond its designated time? It is notable that in that one who eats the meat of such an offering is liable to be punished with kares. This is an actual pigul, right? That at the time of slaughter, you're planning to eat it beyond its time. It's already rendered unfit. And if you then do eat it, it's kares. Whereas one who eats the meat of an offering disqualified due to deviation from the type of offering is not. So we said that if you are bringing a sin offering and you have intent at the time of slaughter to do a burnt offering, now it's rendered unfit. We don't finish the journey, and that animal, is it's already been slaughtered, so basically you have to dispose of it. But you can't sprinkle its blood on the altar, priests don't eat it, etc. Well, what if they do eat it? Is that a kares-bearing penalty? According to this, no. So rather, Rava Bar Achilai says that Rabbi Yirmiyah was actually referring to improper intent with regard to the offering's designated area. Now, this can either mean the place in the temple courtyard where it's slaughtered, here is the temple. Basically, that's east, south, north, west. Right. So this is north, and there are certain offerings, and you can see that there's a kind of a drawing there, right, to the north of the altar. Those little lines on the ground represent rings on the ground where the animals would be tied and then slaughtered. And then you can see that's the altar there. Whereas other animals, so there are some animals that need to be slaughtered here to the north of the altar. And there are other animals that could be slaughtered anywhere in the temple courtyard. So that's designation of area. It could also mean areas where the sprinkling is done. Right, so again, here is the altar, right, and this is the ramp leading up to the altar. Again, getting the direction right. Okay, so west, east. So, and that's north. Okay, so over here you have the northeast corner of the altar, and over here you have the southwest corner of the altar. And then on the altar itself, we're going to talk about that there was a red line around the altar, which I don't think you can see in that drawing, in that model, but there was a line around the altar, and so the sprinkling of the blood had to be done on the two corners, as we'll talk about, the northeast corner or the southwest corner, and this line that surrounds the altar either above or below that line. So if you had intent to sprinkle the blood in the wrong place or to slaughter the animal in the wrong place, that could be a deviation from the correct area. Where was I? Okay, so rather, Rava Bar Achilai says Rav Yirmiyah was actually referring to improper intent with regard to the offering's designated area, since consumption of an offering thereby disqualified is not punishable by charis. And this is what he is saying. Just as in the case of improper intent with regard to the offering's designated area, where if the one slaughtering the offering said, I'm hereby slaughtering it outside the designated area, it is fit. Now, this is because you're talking about intent, right? So why, if he's slaughtering it in the correct area, then that's his intent if he doesn't say anything. So what we're talking about is he's in the correct area, but he thinks he's in the wrong area, right? Or basically he thinks he's in a different area, and that's the wrong area, but he's actually slaughtering it in the right area. So he's slaughtering in the right area, but he has intent to slaughter it in the wrong area. Is this rendered unfit or not? So Rav Bar Achilai says in the name of Rav Yirmiyah, that one who is slaughtering it in the right area but thinks he's in the wrong area, this improper intent will not render it unfit. It remains fit. And nevertheless, if he slaughtered it in order to sprinkle its blood outside its designated area, then it is unfit. So too in the case of deviation from the type of offering, where even if he said, I'm hereby slaughtering it, not for its sake, it is unfit. Isn't it logical that if he slaughtered it in order to sprinkle its blood, not for its sake, it should be unfit? So Rav Ashi objects to this inference. What is notable about intent to sprinkle the blood outside its designated area? It is notable in that the disqualification applies to all slaughtered offerings, as opposed to meal offerings or libations, which are not slaughtered. Can you say the same laws govern the disqualification of an offering sacrificed not for its sake, which applies only to a Pesach and to a sin offering, right? Not only will it not fulfill your obligation, but it is rendered unfit and it cannot finish its journey to the altar. Rather, Rav Ashi says this is what Rav Yirmiyah is saying, just as in the case of deviation with regard to the owner, right, having in mind the wrong owner, where if the one slaughtering the offering said, I'm hereby slaughtering it for the sake of so-and-so, it is fit, and nevertheless, if he slaughtered it in order to sprinkle its blood for the sake of so-and-so, it is unfit, right, having wrong owner in mind, as long as it's not a Pesach or a sin offering, means you're not going to fulfill the obligation of the correct owner, but it remains fit to finish its journey and be brought as a gift offering, a peace offering. But if you had in mind that you would sprinkle the blood for the wrong person, then that would render it unfit, right? Somewhat surprising. So too in the case of deviation from the type of offering where even if he said, I'm hereby slaughtering it not for its sake, it is unfit. Isn't it logical that if he slaughtered it in order to sprinkle its blood not for its sake, it should be unfit? The opinion of Rabbi Yochanan is supported by this logical line of reasoning. Now, Rabbi Illa elicits evidence to support the opinion of Reish Lakish. The performance of one rite with improper intent with regard to another rite is of no consequence. The Torah should not have stated the requirement of sacrificing an offering for its own sake with regard to sprinkling of the blood, and rather should have let one derive it by kal v'chomer inference from the common element of the two other rites, from slaughter and collection of blood. If so, it didn't need to say it, then for what law does the merciful one write this redundant requirement? It is in order to teach us that one cannot have intention from one rite to affect another rite. Right? At the time of slaughter, you don't have an intention with respect to sprinkling. When you get to sprinkling, then you have to have the correct intention. But at the time of slaughter, you're not holding an intention about sprinkling, according to Reish Lakish. So Rav Papa objects to this derivation, but perhaps the requirement is written to teach the opposite, that one can have intention from one rite to affect another rite. A redundant requirement should expand, not reduce the scope of actions that can disqualify the offering. And the Gemara answers, if that were so, let the verse remain silent with regard to sprinkling the blood for the sake of the offering, and one could derive that one can have intention from one rite to affect another rite from Rav Ashi's aforementioned kal v'chomer inference. And the verse must be meant to counteract that inference and teach that one cannot have intention from one rite to affect another rite. And the other Amora, right, later sage than the Mishnah period, in this case Rabbi Yochanan, would refute Rabbi Illa's proof like this. It is necessary for the Torah to state the requirement with regard to sprinkling. It cannot be derived from the cases of slaughter and collection of the blood, since these two share an element of stringency that sprinkling lacks. What is notable about them? They are notable in that in offerings of the most sacred order, they must be performed in the north of the temple courtyard. And furthermore, they are performed in the sacrifice of inner sin offerings as well as external sin offerings. Right? Inner sin offerings are like Yom Kippur, where the sprinkling is done inside the sanctuary, unlike the sprinkling of the blood on the external altar, which is like all the other offerings of the year. And the other Amora, Reish Lakish, would respond that now, in any event, we stand in a discussion with regard to peace offerings, since the requirement of sacrifice for the offering's sake is derived from the verses concerning peace offerings, as we showed in the last few days. So peace offerings are neither offerings of the most sacred order, like sin offerings and guilt offerings, nor inner sin offerings of Yom Kippur, and therefore the elements of stringency mentioned above are irrelevant. A parallel dispute was stated if one slaughtered a sin offering for its sake, but he had intent to sprinkle its blood not for its sake. Rav Nachman says that the offering is unfit, and Rabbah says that it is fit. And Rabbah retracted his opinion and conceded to Rav Nachman due to Rav Ashi's kal v'chomer inference. And now we're going to end that discussion and go back to our Mishnah, Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 1. The Mishnah teaches, Rabbi Eliezer says, the guilt offering also is unfit when sacrificed not for its sake. That's a minority opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. He's saying that a sin offering and a Pesach offering, which if you slaughter them not for its own sake, becomes unfit, and you stop the process right there. Rabbi Eliezer says the same applies to the guilt offering. But the majority says, no, we're going to treat the guilt offering like a burnt offering or a peace offering in this regard, and only the Pesach and sin offerings get both disqualified and rendered unfit if you have improper intent at the time of slaughter. So, with regard to this, that the Rabbi Eliezer says the guilt offering also is unfit when slaughtered not for its own sake. With regard to this, it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer said a sin offering is brought for committing a transgression, and a guilt offering is brought for committing a transgression. So just as a sin offering sacrificed not for its sake is unfit, So too, a guilt offering, sacrificed not for its sake, should be unfit. Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, the inference that you're making is not valid if you say this with regard to a sin offering whose blood is sprinkled above the red line that encircles the altar. Should you necessarily say the same with regard to a guilt offering whose blood is sprinkled below that line, like most animal offerings? Just to get a little bit of a picture of that, right? Here is the altar. You see the ramp leading up to the altar. You see the corners of the altar. And then sort of halfway up the wall, the side of the altar, then you can see that there's a line, right? And that was a red line. And so certain offerings had to have their blood sprinkled above that line and other offerings below that red line. Right, so Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, the inference is not valid. If you say this with regard to a sin offering whose blood is sprinkled above the red line, should you necessarily say the same with regard to a guilt offering whose blood is sprinkled below the line, like most animal offerings? Right, we're introducing something we haven't talked about yet, the designated area for where the sprinkling is done, in order to make a distinction between the two offerings. And say, well, just because they both atone for sins doesn't mean that you can necessarily extend an element of the sin offering and apply it to the law of the guilt offerings where the Torah doesn't specify whether that element applies or not, because even though they both atone for sins, they're treated differently. They have different stringencies. They have different elements in their ritual procedure. And therefore, we don't necessarily extend the law from one to the other. And this would be a reason why not to extend it. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yehoshua, a Pesach can prove the point, as its blood is sprinkled below the red line. And nevertheless, if one slaughtered it, not for its sake, it is unfit. Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, a Pesach cannot serve as the source either, since it possesses a unique element of stringency. What is notable about a Pesach, the Passover offering? It is notable in that its designated time is fixed. When can you bring a Pesach? There's only 2 afternoons a year when you can bring it. Either the afternoon before Passover begins, or if you were not in Jerusalem because you were too far away or you were Tameh, you could bring it on Pesach Sheni 1 month later. Other than that, you can't bring a Pesach. A guilt offering, by contrast, doesn't have a fixed time. When you become obligated to bring a guilt offering, you can bring a guilt offering. Many days of the year give you that possibility. So Rabbi Eliezer said to him, a sin offering can prove the point, as it does not have a fixed time, and nevertheless, it is disqualified if sacrificed not for its own sake. Right? So the sin offering can be brought any time, like a guilt offering, but a sin offering has to be brought above the red line, guilt offering below. Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, now on page 10b, I return to my previous claim that a sin offering is unique since its blood is sprinkled above the red line, and the discussion is going around in circles. Rabbi Eliezer then presented a different logical inference. With regard to a sin offering, the word it is stated concerning slaughter in the verse Leviticus 4:24, and slaughter it in the place where they killed the burnt offering before the Lord, it is a sin offering. So the word it teaches that if it is sacrificed for its sake, it is fit. If it is sacrificed not for its sake, it is unfit. And similarly, with regard to a Pesach, the word it is stated concerning slaughter. In the verse, it is sacrificed of the Lord's Passover. So here, the word it teaches that if it is sacrificed for its sake, it is fit. If it is not sacrificed for its sake, it is unfit. And the word it is also stated with regard to a guilt offering. In the verse, it is a guilt offering. So here too say that the word it teaches that if it is sacrificed for its sake, it is fit. If it is sacrificed not for its sake, it is unfit. We have found the common grammatical element and the laws of the Pesach, the sin offering, the guilt offering, so we should be able to link them all together with respect to this intentionality question. Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, well, with regard to a sin offering, the word it is stated concerning slaughter, teaching that if it is sacrificed for its sake, it is fit, but if it's sacrificed not for its sake, it is unfit. With regard to the Pesach, also the word it is stated concerning slaughter, likewise teaching that if it is sacrificed for its sake, it is fit, but if it is sacrificed not for its sake, it is unfit. But with regard to the guilt offering, the word it is stated only after the burning of the sacrificial portions. And since the offering itself is fit, even if the sacrificial portions were not burned at all, it is certainly fit if they were burned not for the sake of a guilt offering. That's an important distinction between the guilt offering on the one side and the sin offering in Pesach on the other. And this is why we ended up with the law that if a sin offering, a chatas, or a Pesach are slaughtered not for their own sake, they're rendered fully unfit. But a guilt offering, even though it won't, if slaughtered not for its own sake, won't fulfill the obligation of its owner, it does remain fit to finish its journey. And the Baraisa concludes, Rabbi Eliezer said to him, a sin offering and a guilt offering are juxtaposed in the verse that states, as is the sin offering, so is the guilt offering. The verse teaches that just as a sin offering sacrificed not for its sake is unfit, so too a guilt offering sacrificed not for its sake is unfit. That's why Rabbi Eliezer remains on the record with the minority opinion that he would treat the guilt offering like the sin offering. New topic, but related. The Gemara discusses this Baraisa that we've been talking about. The master said, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, I return to my previous claim that a sin offering is unique since its blood is sprinkled above the red line. The discussion is going around in circles. So the Gemara now asks, and let the derivation revert to its starting point, and let Rabbi Eliezer derive the point by analogy from the common element of the two sources. Right? There's three offerings that are involved in our discussion: sin offering, guilt offering, and Pesach. Right? So we said that the sin offering and the guilt offering, both of them have in common no designated time. Pesach has a designated time. The guilt offering and the Pesach have in common their blood is sprinkled below the red line. The sin offering is sprinkled above the red line. So can we say that we could derive one from the other two, even though we can't derive one from the other one? So the Gemara answers, well, even such a derivation would not work, as it can be refuted. What is notable about their common element? A sin offering and a Pesach are notable in that they both have an element of charis. A sin offering is brought for a transgression punishable by charis when committed intentionally, or a sin offering if unwittingly. And one refrains intentionally from bringing a Pesach is liable to be punished with charis. So that's charis for not performing a positive mitzvah. Usually charis is for intentionally violating a negative prohibition, but bringing the Pesach was a really important positive mitzvah, being part of the Jewish people and bringing the Pesach, if at all possible, if it's physically, humanly possible, you got to bring it. Now, we can't in the absence of a temple, but it goes to show you how important participating in Passover is. And indeed, I believe I read somewhere that there are a lot of Jews who sadly are so disconnected from Torah, from Judaism, etc. But more Jews will go to a Seder even than will go to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, right? The most participated ritual is the Seder, although I wonder if Hanukkah candles are included in that questionnaire when that study was done. Where are we? Okay, the Baraisa states, this Baraisa that we're analyzing, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, to Rabbi Eliezer, your comparison of a guilt offering to a sin offering is not valid. If you say a law with regard to a sin offering whose blood is sprinkled above the red line, should you necessarily say the same with regard to a guilt offering whose blood is sprinkled below that line? And the Gemara challenges, well, let Rabbi Yehoshua say to him a different refutation. Your comparison is not valid as if you say the law with regard to a sin offering whose blood enters the innermost sanctum, i.e. the Holy of Holies. When does that happen? On Yom Kippur. Right? Are all sin offerings have their blood sprinkled on the innermost sanctum? Certainly not. It only happens on Yom Kippur. But on Yom Kippur, a sin offering is brought whose blood is sprinkled on the curtain in the Holy of Holies, and I think even between the staves of the ark. That only happens on Yom Kippur, but it is a sin offering, as opposed to the Pesach, whose blood is never sprinkled inside the sanctuary. It's only on the outer altar. Or the guilt offering. Again, its blood is never sprinkled inside the sanctuary. So must the same be said for a guilt offering whose blood never enters the innermost sanctum? And the Gemara answers, we are stating a comparison of guilt offering to sin offering, specifically with regard to the external offerings. Why you bring Yom Kippur into it? Okay, it happens to be that there's a type of sin offering when it's brought on Yom Kippur, it has an internal sprinkling, but putting Yom Kippur aside, there's a whole law of sin offerings that are sprinkled externally. Let's only include those in our comparison to a guilt offering. And the Gemara counters, if so, Rabbi Yehoshua could have refuted the comparison by pointing out another difference between a sin offering and a guilt offering, as if the blood of an external sin offering enters the innermost sanctum, it is disqualified. And this is not so in the case of the blood of a guilt offering. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer holds that a guilt offering whose blood enters the innermost sanctum is also disqualified. Right? Because that's not the place to be sprinkling regular guilt offerings or sin offerings. So even though I'm not sure where the derivation is that we disqualify the offering if it was sprinkled on the inner altar when it should have been on the outer altar, but again, it is in the wrong place. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer holds that a guilt offering whose blood enters the innermost sanctum is also disqualified. And the Gemara counters this. Rabbi Yehoshua could have pointed out another distinction. As a sin offering atones for transgressions for which one is liable to receive kares if he committed them intentionally. Well, Rabbi Eliezer derives the law specifically from a sin offering brought for hearing the voice, i.e. for falsely taking an oath that one is unable to testify in another's case. Yeah, I don't know, I didn't see, I wasn't a witness, when in fact you were a witness. That's a sin, and if you do that intentionally, what's the punishment? Well, this transgression is not punishable by kares. The Gemara counters, Rabbi Yehoshua could have pointed out another distinction, that the blood of a sin offering requires 4 placements on the altar, whereas the blood of a guilt offering requires only 2. Okay, so this is interesting. What they're talking about here, again, we're talking about the altar. All right, so there you see in front of the sanctuary, right? This is the sanctuary. Here's the altar. Right, here is the altar. So again, this is west, this is east, this is north, and that's south. Okay, so this is the northeast corner. It's backwards for me. So that's the northeast corner of the altar, and that's the southwest corner of the altar. Yes, southwest, northeast. Okay, so southwest and northeast corners. Now that's where the sprinkling is done, on those 2 corners. Why do you sprinkle on the corners? Because if you go like this, which is how they sprinkle the blood, right, and you're sprinkling it at a corner, what's going to happen? If you're sprinkling at the northeast corner and you sprinkle blood at the corner of the altar, Some drops are going to land on the north side of the altar, and some drops are going to land on the east side of the altar. And if you do the same process at the southwest corner, you're going to end up with drops on the south side and on the west side. And so, by sprinkling the blood on two corners, you will be sure to have sprinkled blood on all four sides of the altar. And that's the requirement. But what they're having a machloket about, a dispute about, is how do you achieve getting blood on all four sides of the altar? In both sides of this argument, you stand at the northeast corner and the southwest corner. But in one side of the argument, you just sprinkle blood at the corner, and necessarily drops end up on the two sides. And in the other side of the argument, you stand at the corner, and you purposely dab blood, right, or sprinkle carefully on the north, and then again on the east, and then go around to the other corner, and purposely on the south side, and purposely on the west side. So in the second side of the argument, there are four applications of blood, purposely reaching southwest, north, and east. Whereas in the former, the first side of this argument, you just sprinkle twice, and drops land north and east, and drops land south and west. So the Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that the blood of almost all offerings requires four placements, purposely, south and west, north and east. And the Gemara counters, well, Rabbi Yehoshua could have pointed out another distinction, that a sin offering's blood requires placement on all four corners of the altar, whereas the blood of a guilt offering, even according to Rabbi Yishmael, is sprinkled on only two corners. The Gemara answers, and according to your reasoning, why didn't Rabbi Yehoshua mention other distinctions between a sin offering and a guilt offering? Isn't there the requirement that a priest place a sin offering's blood on the altar with his finger? Isn't there the requirement to place the sin offering's blood on the corner of the altar? And even according to the opinion that it is not placed on the corner itself, isn't there the requirement to place it on the edge of the corner? None of these requirements pertain to any other offering than the sin offering. So rather, Rabbi Yehoshua mentioned one of two or three valid claims at his disposal. Okay, he didn't bring up every single distinction, but he used the ones that worked for him. The master says, Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, your comparison is not valid. If you say this with regard to a sin offering whose blood is sprinkled above the red line, should you necessarily say the same with regard to a guilt offering whose blood is sprinkled below that line? And the Gemara challenges, let Rabbi Eliezer say to him, the blood of a guilt offering is also sprinkled above the red line, since Rabbi Eliezer holds that the laws of a guilt offering and a sin offering are parallel. Abaye said, you cannot say that the blood of a guilt offering is presented above the red line due to a kal v'chomer inference from the case of a burnt offering. Just as in the case of a burnt offering, which is treated stringently in that it is totally consumed on the altar. Right? That's the nature of an olah, a burnt offering. It is entirely consumed on the altar. Nobody eats any of it. And its blood is presented below the red line. All the more so is it not clear that in the case of a guilt offering, which is not totally consumed on the altar because the priests eat some of it, that its blood is presented below the red line. But the Gemara rejects this inference. How can you necessarily make that inference, right? What is notable about a burnt offering? It is notable in that it does not atone for a sin, unlike a guilt offering. Perhaps that is why its blood is presented below the red line. And the Gemara answers, a bird sin offering can prove the point, as it atones for a sin, and its blood is presented below the red line. But the Gemara rejects this as well. What is notable about a bird sin offering? It is notable in that it is not a type of offering that is slaughtered. How are birds are killed when they are brought as offerings in the holy temple, but they're not slaughtered. What's the difference? Slaughter means shechting, right? Shechting, taking the very sharp knife, cutting the trachea and esophagus of a mammal. That's how mammals are killed, are slaughtered in order for the blood to be brought, the sacrifice to be made. When birds are killed in order to bring a sacrifice, like a bird sin offering, which, by the way, was a leniency for poor people who couldn't afford to bring a sheep or a goat. So when a person brings a bird, the way that the bird is killed is malika. I think it's called malika, which is a interesting procedure that priests had to know how to do, where basically they used, I think, their thumbnail, to basically like break its neck. But they wouldn't use the knife that they used for the mammals, right? That was a distinction in how bird offerings were killed. They weren't shechted, they were killed in a different way. What is notable about bird sin offering? It is notable in that it is not a type of offering that is shechted. It is killed by pinching the nape of its neck. Perhaps this is why its blood is presented below the red line. So the Gemara answers, well, if so, a burnt offering can prove the point, since it is slaughtered and its blood is still presented below the red line. But what's the problem with the burnt offering? It's entirely consumed by the altar, and sin offerings and guilt offerings aren't. Therefore, the law is derived from a combination of the law of a burnt offering and a bird sin offering. The aspect of this case is not like the aspect of that case, and the aspect of that case is not like the aspect of this case. Their common element is that they are offerings of the most sacred order, and their blood is presented below the red line. So too, I shall include a guilt offering in this law, as it is an offering of the most sacred order, and therefore its blood should be presented below the red line. Rava of Parzakia said to Rav Ashi, let Rabbi Eliezer refute this inference. What is notable about the common element of the two cases? It is notable in that neither a burnt offering nor a bird sin offering has a fixed value. Need you say that the same laws apply to a guilt offering, which has a fixed value of 2 silver shekels? We learned that at Leviticus 5:15. So rather, this is Rabbi Eliezer's reason for not claiming that the blood of a guilt offering is presented below the red line. As the verse states with regard to the presenting of the blood of a sin offering, the priest who offers it, Leviticus 6:19, and the word it indicates that its blood is presented above the red line, but the blood of another slaughtered offering is not presented above the red line. And the Gemara asks, if so, if Rabbi Eliezer accepts the word that it indicates exclusivity, let him also say that the verse "and slaughter it for a sin offering" in Leviticus 4:33 teaches that only a sin offering is fit if slaughtered for its sake, and unfit if slaughtered not for its sake. So consequently, other slaughtered offerings, whether slaughtered for their sake or not for their sake, are fit. Why then does Rabbi Eliezer deem a guilt offering unfit if slaughtered not for its sake? And the Gemara answers, that instance of the word it does not indicate that the law applies specifically to a sin offering and no other offerings, as the Torah excludes the Pesach from such a generalization. A Pesach is certainly disqualified if sacrificed not for its sake, as we've learned repeatedly. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara now counters and says, if so, here too, with regard to the presenting of the blood above the red line, one must say the word it does not indicate that this law applies specifically to a sin offering and no other offerings, as the Torah excludes a bird burnt offering from such a generalization. The blood of a bird burnt offering is presented above the red line. The Gemara answers, with regard to offerings that require slaughter, in any event, the Torah excluded nothing from the generalization. Bird offerings are irrelevant, as they are killed by pinching the nape of the neck, not slaughter. And if you wish, say instead that even the blood of a bird burnt offering is presented in a manner different from that of a sin offering. In accordance with whose opinion is this? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, who says this place where the blood of a sin offering is presented is discreet, and that place where the blood of a bird burnt offering is presented is discreet, meaning different. As it is taught in Baraisa, the blood that must be placed on the lower half of the altar is placed anywhere from the red line and below. And that blood that must be placed on the upper half is placed anywhere from the red line and above. Those are two different places. So Rabbi Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon, said, in what cases this statement said, it is said with regard to a bird burnt offering. But the placement of the blood of an animal sin offering is itself performed only on the actual corner of the altar, right? Is it enough to sprinkle and reach the two sides, or do a placement here and a placement there? Or do we specifically need to put blood on the corner itself, the actual corner edge? That question will come to tomorrow. Okay. Let's take a few questions. Sharon, I did not remember a red line when the Tanakh, right, the Hebrew Bible, describes the construction of the temple. Did I miss it? I will review it after class. Do we have a text reference in our Mishnah where the red line was introduced? It is for sure not in the Mishkan. Correct. But in the Mishkan, meaning in the tabernacle that we carried around in the desert, where we had the Mizbeach, the altar, which was a much smaller altar than the altar that Solomon built and that eventually, right, Ezra and Nehemiah built when the second temple was built, right? This altar here is much larger than the altar that they carried around in the wilderness. When God spelled out for Moses, and Moses instructed the craftsmen building the tabernacle and the various parts, including the altar, what was described is a copper line. Same purpose. It's for being above or below the copper line in the original altar. And then later, that line, for some reason, was replaced with a red line. I don't know why. I don't know why. When they constructed, right, this permanent altar in the permanent temple, replacing the movable tabernacle and the movable altar, I don't know why they didn't just make it out of copper and why they made it red, or maybe it is made out of copper and they're referring to it as a red line. And Karen asked, what is the red line made of? I don't think we're told here, but I think that's the reason I'm talking about this red line. I saw it earlier. Right, number 2, it's the red line in the picture that I showed to you. So a line was painted in red. So it was painted in red, encircling the temple altar at precisely half its height. So that's its purpose. Above or below is we just need to know above the midpoint. So what's the purpose of the red line? So that we know where the midpoint is. Just as a copper line encircled the altar in the tabernacle. This marking was necessary because the blood of animal sin offerings and birds brought as burnt offerings must be sprinkled on the upper portion above the red line, whereas the blood of all other offerings must be sprinkled on the lower portion below the red line. Again, the red line was just a visual reference so that they would know whether they were in the upper half or the lower half. It's not that the line itself was important, it just let them know where the midpoint was. And also Sharon says, if an animal cannot proceed to be a sacrifice, what becomes of it? It seems from the text that it was already shechted. Exactly. So it seems like, you can't complete it, right? So you're not going to be able to sprinkle it. It's not going to be fit for eating. So I can only imagine that they dispose of it and that they cannot benefit from it. But that's my assumption, and we'll see if we get more information on that question. I could be wrong. And so one last late-breaking question. Chaim in Florida, chickens are shechted, but other birds not. Right, so what Chaim is referring to is that when we eat chicken that's kosher, it had to have a kosher shechting, where there is, that same kind of slaughter, that slicing of its neck, so that we could then eat the chicken the way that we eat, lamb or goat, or more usually cow, right, when we're eating beef. And so that's an example of a bird that does require shechting. But when they were talking about bird offerings in the Holy Temple, they were not eaten, right? They were never eaten. And the manner of killing them was not shechting. And maybe that makes sense because they were much smaller birds than chickens, right? They were doves. I think like turtle doves or pigeons, maybe a couple different species, but basically the size of a pigeon. And perhaps the same knife that you would use, for shechting a lamb, a goat, a bull, and even a chicken, you wouldn't use for such a small bird. But at any rate, that I think that even the Torah is specific about Malika, and that's the way that bird offerings needed to be killed. But they weren't for food. They were only for that kind of offering. That's my answer. If there's more to it than I'm aware of, you'll let me know. So that's what I've got for us today, and with God's help, see you tomorrow after Shabbos ends. It's getting a little bit earlier now. I think Shabbos is ending at about 7:30-ish, so I'll aim to be on the air. 8 is probably a little ambitious, but hopefully by like 8:15 Pacific, more or less tomorrow night. May we all be blessed to enter Shabbos in peace and hearing good news, to be refreshed and rejuvenated, uplifted during Shabbos, and come out of Shabbos hearing only good news. We say Amen.